Imagine stepping into a world where a single dinner party cost more than a factory worker earned in his entire lifetime. We're talking about New York City during the Gilded Age, roughly 1870 to 1900, when the word millionaire was invented because there had never been people this wealthy before. If you could walk down Fifth Avenue on a winter evening in 1895, you'd stop dead in your tracks. Not because of what you'd see, but because of what you'd smell first. French perfume mixed with horse manure, gas lamps being replaced by the new electric lights, and underneath it all, the scent of money so new it practically gleamed. This wasn't just wealth. This was a declaration of dominance. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Rockefellers, they weren't building mansions. They were building monuments to prove that America had arrived. And the night, that stretch of hours between sunset and dawn, wasn't for sleeping. It was theater. It was warfare. It was the moment when fortunes were made, reputations destroyed, and marriages arranged over champagne that cost more per bottle than a tenement family paid in monthly rent. Let's start with something most people don't realize. In 1870, New York had about 1 million people. By 1900, it had 3.4 million. But here's the twist. About 300,000 of them were crammed into less than 2 square kilometers in the Lower East Side, living in buildings where sunlight was a luxury. Meanwhile, just 20 blocks north, mansions were going up on Fifth Avenue with Italian marble floors, all rooms that could fit 500 guests, and closets bigger than entire immigrant apartments. The contrast wasn't accidental. It was the whole point. The evening routine for someone in the elite started around 5 p.m., but not with getting dressed. That came later. First came the ritual of deciding what to wear, and this wasn't a simple choice. For women, an evening gown could cost $10,000. That's roughly $300,000 in today's money for a single dress you'd wear once. Maybe twice if you were being modest. Charles Worth in Paris was the only acceptable designer. If you weren't wearing Worth, you weren't anyone. Alva Vanderbilt had a closet 3 stories tall just for her gowns. 3 stories. Some dresses had real gold thread woven into the fabric. Others had pearls sewn so densely they weighed 15 pounds. Men had it easier, but not by much. After 6 p.m., white tie was mandatory. Not black tie, white. The tailcoat had to be cut in London. The shirt starched so stiff it could practically stand on its own. And the collar high enough to force you into perfect posture. Getting dressed took time. For women, 45 minutes minimum, and that's with 3 maids helping. The corset alone was a 20-minute engineering project. Then the layers. Silk undergarments, the petticoat, the gown itself, with buttons running the entire length of the back. Gloves that had to be changed 3 or 4 times during the night, because any visible wear was social death. But where exactly were these people going dressed like European royalty? First stop, dinner. And there was only one place that mattered, Delmonico's. If you hadn't eaten at Delmonico's, you hadn't really dined in New York. The restaurant had been around since 1837, but it hit its peak during the Gilded Age when it moved to 26th and 5th Avenue, later to 44th Street. The menu was entirely in French. The chefs were imported from Paris. The wine list had vintages that predated the American Revolution. Walking into Delmonico's meant entering a space where the lighting was deliberately soft, amber-toned from gas lamps even after electricity arrived, because harsh light was considered vulgar. The tables were mahogany, the chairs upholstered in burgundy velvet, and every surface gleamed. The silverware was real silver, replaced every 2 courses. The crystal was baccarat. And the food, this is where it gets interesting. A typical dinner wasn't 3 courses. It was 12, maybe 15 if it was a special occasion. You'd start with oysters, freshly shucked, served on ice carved into the shape of swans. Then soup, probably turtle soup, which was the height of sophistication. Then fish, maybe sole prepared with a sauce that took the chef 6 hours to make. Then sherbet to cleanse the palate. Then the main course, which might be roasted duck with cherries or beef Wellington, served with vegetables carved into roses. Then salad, because lettuce came after the meat in those days. Then cheese, then dessert, then fruit, then coffee with petits fours. The meal could last 4, sometimes 5 hours. And the cost? $50 to $100 per person. That's $1,500 to $3,000 today, and that's just for dinner. But here's what most people miss. Delmonico's wasn't really about the food. It was about being seen. The restaurant had a social columnist on permanent payroll who noted who dined with whom, what they wore, and who was seated at which table. Your table location told everyone your exact social ranking. Diamond Jim Brady was famous for eating the equivalent of 6 normal portions in a single sitting. He'd arrive at 7 p.m. and wouldn't leave until midnight, working through course after course while doing business deals between bites. Stanford White, the most famous architect of the era, had a private room upstairs at Delmonico's. Officially, it was for business meetings. Everyone knew what it was really for. The walls were soundproofed. The door had a lock. And certain women entered through a side entrance after 10 p.m. The most scandalous dinner in Delmonico's history was the Seeley dinner in 1896. A private party, men only, with entertainment that crossed every line of decency. Dancers performed without clothing. Police raided it. The scandal dominated newspapers for weeks. But here's the thing. The men involved barely faced consequences. They were too wealthy, too connected. One of them laughed it off in an interview, saying the real scandal was that the food wasn't as good as usual. After dinner, the night was just beginning. For the cultural elite, the next stop was the opera. But not just any opera house. The Metropolitan Opera, which had opened in 1883 for one very specific reason: revenge. You see, the old money families controlled the Academy of Music, the previous premier opera house. When the Vanderbilts tried to buy boxes there, they were rejected. Old money didn't want new money sitting next to them. So the Vanderbilts did what any self-respecting billionaire would do. They built their own opera house, bigger, more luxurious, and they made sure the old money families knew they weren't invited. The Metropolitan Opera House had 35 private boxes in the Diamond, Horseshoe, a curved tier of boxes at the perfect viewing level. Each box cost $60,000. That's about $1.8 million today, just for the right to have a box for the season. And behind each box was a private room with sofas, mirrors, and space to receive guests during intermissions. Because here's the secret about opera in the Gilded Age. Almost nobody actually watched it. The opera was the place to be seen, not to see. Families would arrive during the second act, after dinner. They'd sit in their boxes with the lights on. Yes, the box lights stayed on, so everyone could see everyone else. Binoculars weren't for watching the stage. They were for watching other boxes. Who was wearing what? Who was sitting with whom? Whose daughter was flirting with which eligible bachelor? Mrs. Astor, the undisputed queen of New York society, wore a tiara of diamonds so heavy it weighed 2 kilograms. She never arrived before the second act and never stayed past the third. Her presence for that 1 hour was the entire point. When she left, half the audience left with her, no matter what was happening on stage. The intermissions lasted 45 minutes, longer than some of the acts, because that's when the real performance happened. People circulated, gossiped, made connections, destroyed reputations. But when the opera ended, usually around 11 p.m., the men had one more destination. The women went home. The men went to the clubs. The Union Club, the Knickerbocker Club, the Metropolitan Club. These weren't just social clubs. They were the rooms where America's financial future was decided. The Metropolitan Club was founded by J.P. Morgan after he was rejected from another club. Morgan's response? Build his own, more exclusive than any other. The clubs had strict rules. Men only. No business discussions allowed, though every major business deal of the era was negotiated there. Windows covered with heavy curtains, so nobody could see in. And a silence rule in certain rooms so absolute but members developed hand signals to communicate. The libraries had leather-bound books that nobody read. The billiard rooms had tables made from Brazilian mahogany. The smoking rooms had ventilation so poor that the air was blue with cigar smoke. In 1895, J.P. Morgan saved the United States government from bankruptcy in a meeting at the Union Club. Deal was done over whiskey and cigars at 2 a.m. No paperwork, just a handshake. $65 million in gold, arranged in a private club while most of New York slept. Poker games ran until dawn with bets of $50,000 per hand. These weren't recreational games. Fortunes changed hands. Businesses were won and lost. And there were women at the clubs after midnight, though they entered through side doors and were never mentioned in any official records. Entertainment, they were called. Singers supposedly. Dancers. The clubs had rooms upstairs that were never discussed. 20 minutes south by carriage, a completely different New York existed. 5 Points, the worst slum in the Western world. The Bowery, where dive bars served whiskey that could blind you, and opium dens operated openly. This wasn't just poverty. This was organized misery. 300 people living in a building designed for 50. Children working 16-hour days in factories. Disease spreading through streets that never saw sanitation. And here's where it gets strange. The elite went there, not to help, to watch. Slumming, they called it. Organized tours where wealthy people paid $5 to be escorted through the poorest neighborhoods by armed police. They'd visit brothels, watch gang fights from safe distances, then return to their mansions and talk about it at dinner parties like they'd been on safari. Stanford White, who designed monuments for the rich by day, frequented Bowery bars by night, disguised in working-class clothes. The contrast wasn't a problem for these people. It was entertainment. But the true peak of Gilded Age excess wasn't dinners or opera or clubs. It was the balls. Alva Vanderbilt's costume ball in 1883 remains the most expensive private party in American history. $3 million spent in one night. That's $75 million today. 1,200 guests, each of whom spent between $1,000 and $5,000 on their costume alone. The mansion was decorated to look like Versailles. A 50-piece orchestra played. Champagne flowed from fountains. Some women wore dresses with real gold thread. Mrs. Astor arrived at exactly 11 p.m., not 10:59, not 11:01, 11. She wore enough diamonds to fund a small hospital and stayed exactly 90 minutes. Her departure was the signal. The important people left with her. Everyone else stayed, but the party was effectively over. The Bradley Martin Ball in 1897 went too far. $369,000, about $11 million today, spent during an economic depression. The public backlash was so severe, the family fled to England and never returned. That ball marked something important, the beginning of the end. People were starting to notice the inequality, starting to get angry about it. The crash of 1893 had already shown cracks in the system. When Stanford White was shot to death in 1906 on the roof garden of Madison Square Garden, a building he'd designed, by the husband of a woman he'd had an affair with, it became national news for months. The scandal exposed the darker side of this world. The affairs, the cruelty, the assumption that wealth meant immunity from consequences. Mrs. Astor died in 1908. With her went the last vestige of the old social order. In 1912, the Titanic sank, taking several of New York's wealthiest families with it. The unsinkable ship, they'd called it. The metaphor was too perfect to ignore. In 1913, income tax was approved. The government could now take a percentage of wealth. The very rich were furious, but they'd lost the public relations war. The progressive movement was rising. Workers were organizing. Things were changing. World War I finished what the reformers started. When Prohibition arrived in 1920, the entire ecosystem of luxury nightlife collapsed. No more champagne fountains. No more wine lists with pre-revolutionary vintages. The clubs adapted, went underground, but it was never the same. What's left today? The mansions became museums. The Frick Collection, the Cooper Hewitt, these are former private homes. The Metropolitan Opera moved to Lincoln Center, but still exists. Some clubs survive, still exclusive, still secretive. Fifth Avenue is still synonymous with luxury, though the players have changed. The Vanderbilts and Astors are gone. Tech billionaires and hedge fund managers have replaced them. But the core truth remains unchanged. New York has always been a city of extremes. The Gilded Age was simply the moment when America discovered that wealth has no upper limit, that you can spend $3 million on a party and face no consequences beyond gossip, that inequality can exist side by side, 20 blocks separating palaces from slums, and the system doesn't collapse. It just continues. Think about the details nobody mentions. The servants who made all this possible. A Fifth Avenue mansion required a staff of 30 to 50 people. The butler earned maybe $800 a year. The lady's maid, $600. They lived in the attic rooms, tiny spaces with one small window, working 18-hour days to maintain a lifestyle that would have seemed insane to them if they'd had time to think about it. They didn't. The kitchen staff started work at 5 a.m., preparing breakfast that the family might or might not eat. They'd spend all day on a single dinner party, making sauces from scratch, hand-cranking ice cream, carving vegetables into elaborate shapes that would be glanced at once and ignored. When the Vanderbilts threw their costume ball, the preparation took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of round-the-clock work from dozens of people whose names were never recorded. And the waste. After a typical dinner party at a Fifth Avenue mansion, enough food was thrown away to feed a tenement building for a week. Servants weren't allowed to take leftovers home. That was considered theft. The food went into bins, and the bins went to the street, where sometimes, late at night, you'd see children from the Lower East Side going through them. This happened blocks away from ballrooms where champagne was being poured over ice sculptures. The money moved in ways that seem impossible now. William Kissam Vanderbilt spent $9 million building Marble House in Newport, Rhode Island. That was just his summer cottage. $9 million in 1890s dollars, roughly $270 million today. For a house, he used maybe 8 weeks a year. The marble was Italian Carrara, the same marble Michelangelo used. It was shipped across the Atlantic, piece by piece, then carried by hand from the Newport docks. Inside that house, there was a ballroom covered in gold leaf. Real gold. The ceiling alone used enough gold to fund a public school for a decade. Mrs. Vanderbilt would host exactly 4 balls there each summer season. 4 nights. Then the house would sit empty for 10 months, maintained by a full-time staff of 20, who dusted gold ceilings and polished marble floors that nobody walked on. The jewelry is another story that deserves attention. When Mrs. Astor wore her famous diamond tiara to the opera, she was wearing approximately 300 carats of diamonds. At today's prices, that's roughly $30 million sitting on one woman's head. And she wasn't unique. Every woman in the diamond horseshoe was wearing jewelry worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes. They'd change jewelry between acts, different pieces for different parts of the evening. There were insurance policies specifically for jewelry worn to social events. Detectives from Pinkerton's agency would sometimes be hired to shadow particularly wealthy women at balls, not because they expected theft, but because the insurance companies required it. A woman might wear $1 million in jewelry, in 1890s money, to a single party. If something went missing, the scandal would be enormous, but not for the reasons you'd think. The scandal would be that someone was careless enough to lose it. The hotels deserved their own discussion, because they were architectural statements as much as the mansions. The Waldorf Astoria, which opened in 1893, wasn't just a hotel. It was a declaration that New York had arrived as a world-class city. The building took up an entire city block. The lobby had marble columns imported from Italy, carpets woven in Persia specifically for the space, and lighting fixtures designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany. A suite at the Waldorf could cost $100 a night. That's $3,000 in today's money, and that's just for the room. Meals were extra. service was extra. If you wanted the hotel orchestra to play at your private dinner, it was $500. But people paid it because staying at the Waldorf meant something. It meant you'd made it. Businessmen who couldn't afford Fifth Avenue mansions would rent permanent suites at the Waldorf and conduct their entire social lives from there. The restaurant at the Waldorf became famous for a dish called Waldorf salad, which sounds quaint now but was revolutionary then. Apples, celery, walnuts, and mayonnaise. Simple ingredients arranged in a way nobody had thought of before. The chef who invented it, Oscar Churky, became a celebrity. People would come to the restaurant just to meet him, to be seen talking to him. A salad made a man famous because it was served in the right place to the right people. Transportation was part of the spectacle. The wealthy didn't just arrive places. They arrived in style calculated to impress. Carriages were custom built, painted in family colors, upholstered in the finest leather. The Vanderbilts had carriages with actual silver fittings, not silver-plated, solid silver. The horses were bred specifically for appearance, groomed daily, and replaced the moment they showed any sign of age. Some families spent $10,000 a year just maintaining their carriage and horses. When automobiles arrived in the late 1890s, the very rich bought them immediately, not because they were practical, but because they were new and expensive. Early cars cost as much as a house. They broke down constantly. They were difficult to operate and dangerous, but they were status symbols, and in Gilded Age New York, status was everything. William K. Vanderbilt, Jr. became obsessed with automobile racing, building his own racetrack and hosting competitions where the prize money was more than most people earned in a year. The newspapers of the era covered high society the way modern media covers celebrities. The New York Times had an entire section dedicated to who attended which events, what they wore, and who they were seen with. A mention in the society pages could make or break a social climber. Being left out meant you didn't matter. Journalists cultivated sources among the servants, paying them for information about their employers' private lives. Education was interesting in this world because it was almost beside the point. The sons of wealthy families went to Yale or Harvard, but not really to learn. They went to make connections, to join the right clubs, to meet other sons of wealthy families. Grades didn't matter. Nobody cared if you actually graduated. What mattered was that you were there, that you were seen, that you became part of the network. Daughters weren't sent to university at all. They had private tutors who taught them French, piano, watercolors, and manners. The goal wasn't education. The goal was marriageability. A daughter who could speak French, play piano adequately, and host a dinner party without embarrassing her family was considered well-educated. A daughter who wanted to study medicine or law was considered troubled. The marriage market was literal and brutal. Mothers kept lists of eligible bachelors, ranked by wealth and family name. Young women were paraded at balls and opera performances like prize horses. Matches were arranged based on financial advantage and social position. Love was considered a nice bonus, but certainly not required. When Consuelo Vanderbilt was forced to marry the Duke of Marlborough, it was purely a business transaction. The Vanderbilts got a title. The Duke got $9 million. Consuelo's opinion was never asked. The parties had themes that required months of preparation. An Egyptian night meant transforming your entire ballroom into a pharaoh's palace, with painted columns, hired actors in costume, and food prepared according to imagined ancient recipes. A Renaissance evening meant everyone wore costumes that cost thousands, and the entertainment might include actual opera singers performing excerpts from period-appropriate works. The competition to host the most memorable party was fierce and expensive. Records show that some families spent $50,000 on a single party. That's $1.5 million today for one night. The flowers alone might cost $5,000. Imported orchids from South America, arranged by the city's most expensive florist. The party favors, small gifts given to guests, might be Tiffany silver or imported French chocolates in custom boxes. Nothing was too expensive if it proved you could afford it. And through all of this, the underlying truth was that most of this wealth was very new. The Vanderbilts had been poor farmers 2 generations earlier. The Astors had started as fur traders. The Rockefellers came from nothing. This wasn't old aristocratic money passing down through centuries. This was money made in railroads, oil, steel, and real estate, made quickly and often ruthlessly, and now being spent in ways designed to make everyone forget how recently these families had been nobody. The night of luxury in Gilded Age, New York, wasn't just about excess. It was about erasure. Erasing the past, erasing the origins, erasing any memory of struggle or poverty. Every diamond tiara, every 12-course meal, every private opera box was a statement. We have arrived, and there's nothing you can do about it. That statement echoed through marble hallways and velvet-lined clubs, through champagne-soaked ballrooms and smoke-filled poker rooms, until the morning light revealed it all for what it truly was. A performance. Brilliant, excessive, unsustainable, and absolutely unforgettable.